Testing.
Check test one.
We have cameras and mic. Yeah? Okay, we're going to get started. Welcome, everyone, and good morning. My name is Elizabeth McIsaac. I'm the chair of the Housing Rights Advisory Committee, and the clerk has confirmed that we have quorum. So I would like to call meeting 7 of the Housing Rights Advisory Committee to order, and welcome everyone. We have most of you online today, so I will be looking to my screen, and I would ask you to keep your cameras on when it comes time for motions and voting so I can see your hands. Thank you. The meeting is being held with committee members and staff participating both by video conference and in person at City Hall in Committee Room 2. Members of the public may also attend in person or observe the meeting on YouTube. Because we are meeting in person and remotely, I ask for your patience if there are any delays or technical issues. If you are registered to speak at today's meeting, please listen for me to call your name. I will call speakers in the order that they appear on the list. The list of speakers can be viewed online by visiting the Housing Rights Advisory Committee at toronto.ca/council and clicking the speakers box for today's meeting. I request that staff and invited participants, as well as all observers joining remotely, keep their video turned off unless they need to speak or answer questions. This will make it easier for me as chair to see the members as we debate and vote on the agenda items. I also ask that all members and staff keep their microphones muted unless you need to answer a question or speak. If members wish to speak on an item, please make sure your video is on and raise your hand or unmute your microphone and indicate your intention to speak. When voting on an item or a motion, I ask members to turn on your video and raise your hand to indicate your vote. I also remind members that if you have any motions on any of the agenda items, they must be submitted in writing and can be emailed to staff at hrac@toronto.ca. And so with that, we'll begin the meeting. Although we may be meeting in different locations today, the Housing Rights Advisory Committee would like to acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It is also home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. So, down to some business items. May I have a motion, please, from someone on the committee to confirm the minutes from our meeting on June 3rd, 2025. I am looking to the screen. Someone to move that, please. Thank you, Anne-Marie. All those in favor, please turn on your screens. I'm looking to see hands. All those in favor? Thank you. And carried. The first item for today is the meeting schedule for the remainder of the term. This is the proposed schedule of meetings for the Housing Rights Advisory Committee in 2026. It has been sent out to the members of the committee. Are there any questions on this item? Are there any speakers to the item? Seeing none, I move to receive the item. All in favor, may I see your hands? Annie, I need to see your hand. Chase, I got yours. Thank you very much. Diana, I got yours. Thank you. Motion carried. The next item is the chair's update. As the committee chair, I will provide an update to the committee. I apologize this wasn't posted earlier, so you will bear with me as I read through, or maybe you have it on your screen at this point. In alignment with the city's evolving response to ensure that all people in Toronto, including refugee claimants, are able to access shelter and critical support services, I am pleased to share some of the updates in support of City Council's direction on CC 28.2 in response to the Ombudsman Toronto Housing Unit's investigation into the city's decision to stop allowing refugee claimants into base shelter system beds. As part of those directions from Council, I have been working with staff from the Toronto Shelter and Support Services to develop and deliver training sessions for senior leaders on the city's Encampment Steering Committee. Further training sessions are being planned and delivered more broadly within Toronto Shelter and Support Services. I am pleased to report that the initial sessions have resulted in engaged and committed discussions on how to operationalize the progressive realization of the right to adequate housing at the City of Toronto. HRAC, the Housing Rights Advisory Committee, will also be consulting with Toronto Shelter and Support Services on its work to develop an access to shelter framework to support analysis of any new shelter eligibility changes in alignment with the Toronto Housing Charter. We will be looking forward to upcoming consultations with their team on this important work. Regrettably, at the end of August, the federal government notified the City of Toronto that it would only fund 26% of the costs to shelter refugees and asylum seekers under the Federal Interim Housing Assistance Program, IHAP, for the period January 2025 to March 2026. This represents a projected shortfall of $107 million, resulting in significant operational impacts to the shelter system. This funding decision by the federal government is contrary to the purposes and requirements set out in the National Housing Strategy Act, which explicitly recognizes Canada's obligations under the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. In so doing, they are jeopardizing the city's ability to comply with its own charter that was adopted to align with the NHSA in a collaborative spirit. Reducing support for refugee shelter undermines Canada's immediate obligations under ICESR, the Covenant, to ensure access to shelter and housing without discrimination on the grounds of immigration status. The cuts constitute a retrogressive measure that cannot be justified in the present context in Canada. On September 3rd, I attended a roundtable with community organizations working with refugees and asylum seekers in Toronto, convened by Mayor Chow and Councillor Bravo, to discuss the expected impacts of funding changes through IHAP. The consequences of the funding reduction will mean significantly reduced capacity in the city's refugee-serving community and the wider city shelter system, jeopardizing the city's ability to meet its minimum core obligations to protect, respect, and fulfill the human right to adequate housing. The Mayor and community organizations are working to convince the federal government to maintain their funding support for refugee shelter in Toronto. Finally, Annie Hodgins, chair of the Maintaining Housing Working Group, and I met with staff from Toronto's Municipal Licensing and Standards Division to discuss opportunities to continue to engage with HRAC on the implementation of the Multi-Tenant Housing Licensing Bylaw, MTH bylaw, in particular on the tenant protections and the preservation of multi-tenant housing. Given that the committee has identified the implementation of the city's MTH bylaw in its priorities framework, that's us, our priority framework, I look forward to ongoing opportunities for HRAC to engage on this critical housing rights issue. And that is my update since we last met in June. I will pause there and ask if members have any questions on this item. Diana.
Given this IHAP funding and the devastating effect it would have on the City of Toronto if we did not have it, what can we do as a committee?
So I think what I heard from the Mayor is that all help in terms of making the case for the importance of this funding is welcomed. There could be, and I think there is an opportunity for this committee to express our concerns on the potential violation to that right to housing to the federal ministers with responsibility for this. The program itself is under the Minister of Immigration, IRCC, but the obligations regarding the right to housing are under the Minister of Housing. It is, I would suggest we could look at sending a letter through the chair, I could do this on behalf of the committee, to the two ministers outlining our human rights concerns that flow from the cut to funding. Okay. Are there other questions?
Just can we actually do that and send that letter?
Okay. I think we can. I would just open it to the floor if there's any concerns, perhaps, with the committee expressing this to the federal ministers on behalf of the committee. I'm not seeing any hands go up, in which case I would suggest a motion, and the motion could read that HRAC recommends that the chair write a letter to the federal ministers of housing and immigration to express the committee's deep concern regarding the funding cuts to the interim housing assistance program and the resulting impact on capacity in the city's refugee-serving community and the wider city shelter system, jeopardizing the city's ability to meet its minimum core obligations to protect, respect, and fulfill the human right to adequate housing. I've just emailed that to Tanya. So, sorry, I should have emailed it sooner. These are the technical pieces we're asking for patience with. Sometimes things aren't instantaneous. So, items. You got it? Does it need to go on the screen before we vote on it? Yeah. Okay, so just patience for one moment.
Sorry, what is the technical difficulty?
Should we go forward and come back? Nope, we're good. And this should be coming up on the screen now. There we go. We have a motion on the floor. I've already read it. If you could just take a moment to review it, and then I would ask, I guess I'm moving it. Yep. I'm moving this. So the question is, all in favor? So if I could see a show of hands. Yes, 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 yes. I don't see Chase. Is Chase still online?
Yes, I'm here. Yes, I'm good to see. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Chase. Great, then carried. Wonderful. Thank you very much, everyone. And that brings us to item 3, mapping resources for tenants at risk, an update on the situation table for housing at risk. We are joined today by Don Nichols and Aisha Salim from the Housing Secretariat, who will present on the availability of resources, services, and supports for tenants who are at risk of displacement, and an update on the launch of the new situation table for housing at risk. Welcome, Don. Welcome, Aisha. And it's over to you to get us started. Over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me? That's great. My name is Aisha Salim. I'm the manager of the Renter Strategy Unit at the Housing Secretariat, and myself and my colleague Don Nichols of the Housing Secretariat are here to provide you with an update in response to 2 directives. If we can go to the next slide, Don. Thank you. In response to the directive number 1 from HRAC to provide an update on the mapping availability of resources, services, and supports for tenants who are at risk of displacement, and to also provide an update on the implementation of the housing at risk table. Secondly, we've also been requested to consult with tenant organizations and councillors and to report back to Planning and Housing Committee on a review of the adequacy of funding for the Toronto Tenant Support Program, including but not limited to increasing access to pro bono legal representations, defending tenants from Aggies, and advocacy supports as well. And what we're going to be presenting to you today is really a summary of the tenant supports available at the City of Toronto, and then opening it up to a discussion and feedback both from committee and deputants about what potential gaps or existing services that may need to be enhanced at the city. So we're looking forward to hearing all of the feedback. And with that, I will hand it over to Don.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Great. My name is Don Nichols. I'm the manager of the grants program in the Housing Secretariat. Thank you very much for having us here today. I'm going to provide you just a bit of an overview on some of the supports for tenants that we have available. And then, like Aisha mentioned, we'll open up to some questions. So the first program I'll talk about is the Toronto Rent Bank program. So this is one of our eviction prevention programs that provides timely assistance and support to tenants at risk of homelessness. And these are one-time grants for rental arrears or rental deposit. And the city funds Neighborhood Information Post as the lead agency that delivers this program. And they do this alongside a number of our housing service hubs across the City of Toronto to deliver the program across the city. The Rent Bank is one of our key eviction prevention pillars in the Housing TO Action Plan. In terms of eligibility, it's for people who are behind on their rent, pay market rent, have a rental unit that's covered by the RTA, a proof of income, and no more than 85% of household income to be spent on rent. This year, in 2025 alone, we are on pace to support approximately 27 households, and this is up significantly from previous years. The city also funds the Toronto Tenant Support Program. This particular program, the aim of the program is to preserve affordable private market housing through tenant information, legal services, outreach, organizing, and research. And we have some partners that help us to do this important work. They are the Canadian Centre for Housing Rights, who provide legal supports to tenants, as well as a research project. We also fund the Federation of Metro Tenants Association for outreach and also organizing and information services for tenants. And we also fund the Center for Immigrant and Community Services to provide information services to tenants as well in a number of different ways, whether it be on the phone line, through email, as well as outreach. In terms of the tenant program, tenants groups can access legal services to address eviction, affordability matters like above guideline rent increases, AGIs, and 12s and 13 notices. And CCHR provides legal services to tenants, tenant groups, or associations in private market housing. Just to give you a little bit more information on the Toronto Tenant Support Program, CCHR, they are the agency that provides legal services supporting at-risk tenants to dispute eviction and tenancy issues at the local tribunal. Some of those issues include above guideline increases, eviction matters like N12s and N13s, like I mentioned, rent evictions, maintenance applications, and multi-tenant rooming housing bylaw. The Federation of Metro Tenants Association, this particular organization, provides organizing and capacity building. So they work with tenant associations and groups to increase awareness of landlord and tenant rights and responsibilities. They build networks for tenant associations to help tenants to resolve eviction and affordability issues. And they support tenant groups facing emerging issues to organize, educate, and build capacity in the City of Toronto. The Federation of Metro Tenants Association and CICS also have information services for tenants, so they provide information via the phone, the web, social media, to tenants related to protecting affordable tenancies, thereby building awareness of tenant rights and responsibilities. CCHR also conducts research, collects data, and reports on topics that are related to the preservation of affordable housing in Toronto. Topics are identified annually with the Housing Secretariat's Renters Strategy. Another important service for tenants in the City of Toronto are multi-service housing service hubs. So housing service hubs are nonprofit agencies across the city that help people to find and maintain housing and to avoid eviction. These particular centers provide brief, responsive, and person-centered housing services and help tenants understand their rights as tenants, mitigate tenancy issues, and refer to appropriate legal support when needed. Some of the key things that these multi-service hubs do, they support clients with achieving greater housing stability through community resources, referrals, and connection to services. Key services like the furniture bank, like ID services, food banks, life skills, legal and health supports. These particular housing hubs also serve as local access centers to administer the city's rent bank program and the Emergency Energy Fund by supporting renters through the application process and participating in operations committee as required. Another key important thing for the multi-service hubs, they provide non-judgmental, trauma-informed, and anti-oppressive services rooted in harm reduction and housing first approaches. We are currently funding 12 housing service hubs across the City of Toronto. They are situated in geographic areas that make it a little bit more accessible for people. There is also a mobile component if clients have a difficult time getting to the service. Out of the 12 housing hubs, we also fund, one of them is a Black-led housing service hub. We have an Indigenous housing hub through Weekwoman. And we have also onboarded a new housing service hub through the Centre Francophone for Francophone people as well. The next program I'll just briefly review is the Eviction Prevention in the Community, or EPIC program. So this particular program provides person-centered eviction prevention case management services to low-income, vulnerable households that are facing imminent risk of eviction in Toronto. EPIC case management staff are mobile, working directly with housing providers, community legal clinics, and community agencies to support purposeful engagement with tenants in addressing underlying causes of eviction and housing instability. As part of established case management plans to prevent eviction and sustain tenancies, EPIC case management staff source financial assistance programs, benefits to help households address their rental arrears, increase their income, and reduce their expenses, and ultimately lead to more housing stability for people in the city. The EPIC program includes 1 city staff team and 6 community contracted agencies. Those agencies are Agincourt Community Services Association, Albion Neighborhood Services, the Housing Help Center, Medinta Community Services, the Neighborhood Group Community Services, and Good Shepherd Refugee Social Ministries. I'm going to turn it to Aisha.
In response to City Council direction to form a housing at risk table, City staff recently launched the new Situation Table for Housing at Risk, or STAR as it's known. Formerly known as SPIDER, STAR is an enhancement to SPIDER, and it has a new focus on housing, eviction prevention, and displacement. The Housing Secretariat has recently joined with Social Development to co-chair the STAR table in order to really enhance renter supports at the table and expand the existing membership of STAR to include renter support organizations as well. Along with these enhancements, the STAR table is going to provide the same services as SPIDER. It is a situation table that provides case coordination services and that is focused on reducing the recurrence of complex risks among vulnerable residents. STAR is reserved for complex situations where there's a gap between the needs of vulnerable people and the available city and/or community services that are needed to resolve and address the situation. STAR is going to be an additional service among all of the city services and programs, an additional tool designed to prevent evictions, respond during emergencies, and to help renters with longer-term housing needs. Lastly, I do want to say that we acknowledge the presentation and the deputations that have made recommendations about the STAR model. Today, STAR is at its beginning, and we're thankful for the feedback and will be taking those recommendations back for future consideration.
Okay, I'm also just going to now talk to you a little bit about the impact of the Toronto Tenant Support Program funding, just to give a bit of a snapshot for people. So just in terms of, we took a look at just our 2024-2025 program impact snapshot. So just to give you an idea, in over a 1-year period, our housing service hubs, which are those multi-service hubs that I talked about, placed 688 clients into housing. In terms of the EPIC program, we were able to sustain tenancies for 809 households. For the rent bank in 2024-25, we processed 2,350 grants to households to avoid eviction. That number's set to increase to closer to 2,700 this year. For the Emergency Energy Fund, we supported 819 households to help pay emergency energy arrears. Our legal supports were able to support 487 tenants. Part of our outreach through the FMTA supported 175 tenant groups receiving both organizing and capacity building. And in terms of our information lines, we supported approximately 16,578 tenants through our 2 agencies offering hotline services. We also meet frequently for all of our Toronto Tenant Support Program partners across the city, and we've heard some emerging needs that have come up, which I'm looking forward to talking with you today. We're really hearing that there's an increased complexity of challenges that are faced by tenants, including displacement. We're also hearing about some gaps in case management supports for high needs individuals who need more than emergency-based services and longer case management to help to navigate the system and sustain tenancies and housing stability. We're hearing a need for longer-term engagement beyond crisis response, and we're really hearing a need for a desire for integrated support services. So, for example, housing, mental health, income, legal, etc. We've put together a slide on some potential options to address the need. So some of the things that we're discussing are, tenants need integrated, tenant-centered services that combine housing, health, and income. Frontline capacity and partnerships must grow to deliver coordinated case management. Also, I would say mobile case management across the city and not just in specific areas as well. Citywide access to multi-service hubs for tenants is essential for consistent, comprehensive support across neighborhoods. And advocacy is needed for stronger housing benefits and income supports to sustain housing stability. So this is the final slide for discussion and next steps. Curious to see, where do you see the greatest gaps in tenant supports? What models of case management do you think are critical to supporting tenants with higher needs? So for example, mental health, income, legal, etc. And how can we better align services with tenant needs and tenant rights? Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Aisha. I know that we have 3 speakers to this item, but before we go to the speakers, I'm just, one of our committee members has just joined. B is online. B, I wonder if you could unmute so we can just check your sound and say something. Are you there, B? So I'm looking for direction.
Can you hear me?
There you are. Okay, can you hear us, B?
Yeah, I can hear you guys perfectly, but it just I didn't know how to press the talk, but now I got it started.
Okay, so are you sorted?
But I cannot see. I cannot. Huh?
You can't see.
I cannot see anything. The only thing is, if I want to talk, I had to press. I had to press *6 to talk.
Okay, so what I'll need you to do, because I can't see you, is unmute and say I'm here when you want to.
I can raise hand though in that case. Huh?
When you want to say something,
Sorry.
because I can't see you, I will need you to unmute and say, Elizabeth, I'm here, and then I will put you on the list of speakers.
Okay.
Is that good?
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds
Great.
good.
Thank you. Okay, so now we will move to the speakers to this item. First, we have Pablo Escobar from the Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness. And a reminder, each speaker has 5 minutes. Welcome.
MTH framework. My name's Pablo Escobar. I'm the chair of the Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness Systems Barrier to Housing Working Group. The Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness is a community-based collective impact initiative committed to ending homelessness in Toronto. Our networks include nonprofit organizations that support those living with homelessness and those who are housed and who must spend a disproportionate amount of income on housing, as well as affordable and supportive housing developers, property managers, and landlords. The System Barriers to Housing Outcomes Working Group of the Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness is comprised of community experts who identify systemic challenges to accessing access to housing for the most vulnerable and create recommendations for system changes to increase inflow into permanent housing. We welcome this opportunity to speak to you today about our concerns related to the impact of the multi-tenant housing framework and to bring forward recommendations to mitigate them. The Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness supported City Council's decision to license multi-tenant dwellings across the city, as this type of housing is often the only one available to people with very low income. We did so in part because there were commitments and council direction to develop strategies to ensure that the licensing framework would not render current MTH tenants homeless, consistent with its commitment to uphold the principles of Toronto's Housing Charter. In particular, the Housing at Risk table was to play a central role in supporting tenants facing evictions due to MTH licensing enforcement. We're very concerned that the shift away from the HART table strategy to the new situation table for housing at risk, the STAR, will not provide the critically focused whole building approach the former promised. to mitigate the negative effects on tenants of the city's MTH licensing framework and its enforcement. In the absence of these programs and supports, the MTH legalization framework undermines tenants' rights to housing rather than helping further realize the right to housing. MTH tenants, already vulnerable and marginalized, have little to protect them from homelessness in situations where increased enforcement results in tenant displacement. So we have three recommendations. Number one is, if it's truly too late to return to the proposed HART table, the strategies that promise must be brought back into those of the STAR table or delivered elsewhere. To date, it seems that the STAR table will not include the following responsibilities that were to be undertaken by the proposed HART table. Coordinate interdivisional planning and responses to mitigate the loss of affordable and mid-range rental housing, and support tenants who face evictions. Make recommendations to city manager concerning policy or program changes to address systemic and structural gaps that contribute to the loss of affordable and mid-range rental housing and housing precarity for tenants. Review data gaps. Coordinate emergency relocation and supports for tenants who have been evicted and not just complex cases. Mitigate the loss of units or transition tenants to alternative housing solutions if relocation is the only option, not just complex cases. Proactively plan to attempt to mitigate potential displacement caused by the MTH legalization framework. Monitor the implementation of the MTH legalization framework on potential tenant displacement, and monitor the impact of the MTH legalization framework throughout implementation, including tracking data and developing metrics on impacts on tenants, housing affordability, and evictions. These HART table responsibilities represent critically important work that must be done to ensure the city meets its commitment to preventing and protecting tenants from displacement. One way to do this is to restart an updated rooming house emergency response plan. This was an emergency homelessness prevention approach that worked and can, with the right design and adequate funding, do so again. Recently, the Ombudsman recommended that the city consider whether to update or replace the rooming house emergency response plan. As they said in their report, and I quote, "I believe the RHERP would be a useful blueprint for developing an updated coordinated plan to support multi-tenant home tenants at risk of eviction, while prioritizing tenant human rights to adequate housing and the preservation of affordable housing in the city." We agree with this assessment. Our third recommendation is to create a City of Toronto funded portable housing benefit specifically for displaced MTH tenants at risk of homelessness. And I'm going to skip a couple of things just to get to the in conclusion portion. And so the Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness strongly recommends that the responsibilities that were to be undertaken by the HART table related to program coordination, data collection, monitoring, evaluation, revision, and prevention of tenant displacement and homelessness and affordable housing loss be implemented through an updated rooming house emergency response plan. We also support the recommendations of others before you today, including proactive displacement prevention workers to do outreach to all unlicensed MTH tenants and not just tenants of MTH that have received an order to comply.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Before we go to the next speaker, are there any questions to the speaker? Seeing none, thank you very much, Pablo. Next on the speakers list is Melissa Goldstein. I believe Melissa is online. Welcome, Melissa. The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Melissa Goldstein. I'm a tenant advocate and member of the city's Tenant Advisory Committee. The Federation of Metro Tenants Associations is funded by the city to do outreach to multi-tenant house tenants in multi-tenant houses that have received an order to comply from MLS. Current data from the FMTA suggests that as many as half of all the tenants in unlicensed multi-tenant houses that their outreach staff have visited are facing eviction or have already been evicted. That's half. Given the city's lack of deeply affordable rental housing, many of these tenants are at risk of homelessness or already are homeless. These are largely tenants who are at risk or experiencing eviction not through any fault of their own, but because their landlord of their unlicensed multi-tenant house is afraid of bylaw enforcement. A lot of these evictions can't be prevented. Tenants who are facing unpreventable displacement need rehousing support. Emergency programs and supports, specifically support with finding, accessing, and affording alternate permanent housing, are not only critically needed to mitigate the negative effects of the city's multi-tenant house licensing framework on tenants, but to realize the city's commitment under the Toronto Housing Charter to ensure that city policies and programs are designed to avoid residents from being made homeless. None of the programs and supports detailed in the city's presentation today meet this need. The STAR table does not do the critically necessary work that staff promised the HART table would do, leaving a significant number of gaps. The role and responsibilities of the HART table are detailed in attachment 2 of PH 35.18 on the city's rent eviction policy. HART was supposed to address this need for rehousing support. It was supposed to coordinate emergency relocations and supports for tenants who have been evicted, not just deal with the complex cases that the STAR table is saying it will address. The supports currently available to multi-tenant house tenants and detailed in today's presentation are largely inappropriate for multi-tenant house tenants who are A, highly vulnerable, who often don't have English fluency or the capacity to advocate for themselves effectively, and B, are facing eviction for landlord-caused reasons, not for rent arrears or problematic behavior. For example, the rent bank in Epic cannot help a tenant who is losing their housing because the landlord is closing the house or rooms as a result of new licensing requirements. While city staff told the Ombudsman that the EPIC program helps tenants who require support with emergency relocation, staff's presentation today makes it clear that the EPIC program does not provide rehousing support to tenants losing their homes as a result of closures. I want to emphasize this because staff told the Ombudsman's investigators and City Council the opposite, and later today the Ombudsman will be updating you on work implementing recommendations that may be based on a serious misunderstanding of what the EPIC program does and does not do. I'm hoping that as members of this committee you can clarify this with the Ombudsman when they discuss their work later today. This gap in support for multi-tenant house tenants at risk of homelessness is much worse now that the city's emergency rooming house response plan is no longer operational. A staff report on an enhanced approach to emergency relocations was originally due in November 2021 and is now expected in this fall. The Ombudsman directed staff to consider in this report restarting the emergency rooming house response plan. I want to recommend today that the city do that, restart the plan and properly fund it and resource it. And I'm hoping to see recommendations to do so in the upcoming staff report. Staff are proposing today an option of advocating for housing benefits and income supports. However, simply advocating for supports will not prevent tenants from ending up homeless. I recommend that the city step up and provide rent supplements or housing benefits to help multi-tenant house tenants who are losing their housing as a result of city policy. If the city can find $1.2 million a year to enforce bans on protesting, which could have funded 2,400 portable housing benefits, then the city should be able to find the money to keep these vulnerable tenants housed and out of the shelter system. These rent supplements or housing benefits would ideally be distributed specifically to displaced multi-tenant house tenants via the Emergency Rooming House Response Program and other support agencies. The HART table was also supposed to play a critical program coordination, monitoring, evaluation, and revision role, and it does not appear that the STAR table will do this work. Specifically, the HART table was to coordinate interdivisional planning and responses to mitigate the loss of affordable and mid-range rental housing and support tenants who face evictions. It was to monitor the implementation of the legalization framework on potential tenant displacement and make recommendations to the city manager concerning policy or program changes to address systemic and structural gaps that contribute to the loss of affordable and mid-range rental housing and housing precarity for tenants. And it was supposed to monitor the impacts of legalization through its implementation by tracking data and developing metrics on tenant impacts, housing affordability, and evictions, and work to address data gaps, propose operational changes to improve data collection, and work to improve access to data for this purpose. And it was supposed to proactively plan to mitigate potential displacement caused by the legalization framework.
Melissa, I'm going to ask you to wrap up.
I have so much more to say here.
I know.
Let me just see how I can wrap this up. So basically there are a number of metrics that I propose in my submission that I think that the city should be tracking. We have not been able to get good data about this tracking. I think the tracking is very important for the city, for advocates and social services to be able to intervene. And so I'm recommending that the city create a data dashboard where these metrics are tracked on a monthly basis, similar to what we've seen with homelessness tracking. And I'm going to leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. And we do have your submission, so all of the details are included here. Thank you very much. Are there questions to the speaker from the committee? I'm not seeing any hands. Then I will say thank you very much, Melissa. I appreciate the work that has gone into this and the thoughtful analysis. We have another speaker from the Federation of Metro Tenant Association, Yaroslava Montenegro. Is Yaroslava online or in the room?
Hi there.
Hi. Over
Hi.
to you. You have 5 minutes, please.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. Mari Pulamien. My name is Yaroslava Avira Montenegro. I am the executive director of the aforementioned Federation of Metro Tenants Associations. So on behalf of the FMTA, I would like to clarify the data reference and submissions by various fellow tenant advocates as presented before this committee. In our view, the representations unintentionally oversimplify and misrepresent the data provided to fellow tenant organizations. And as such, we feel the need to correct the record and to be clear on the data collected by our organization. The FMTA presented information with no identifying information that was requested by fellow tenant organizations in late June and August of 2025 related to our work in the multi-tenant housing work that we do. This information is specific to the catchment of one such organization and roughly considers less than 30 addresses in the area of the downtown east side of Toronto. Of the addresses, over 40% are not currently facing eviction for the residences that have been flagged by the City of Toronto and as running an illegal rooming house. Yet another 30.2% have faced the threat of illegal eviction. However, of this 30.2% facing these threats, only 3 addresses in the area have been identified as having experienced an illegal eviction as of early August 2025. An additional 14.6% are in the process of have experienced a formal eviction notice, such as an N4 or N13 notice, through the Landlord-Tenant Board, with a further 14.6% marked as not having responded to FMTA's request for solicitation. In light of the above, it's our view that there is no evidence to suggest that the multi-tenant housing bylaw has caused an increase in evictions in the area of the downtown east side in Toronto. In the case of illegal and informal evictions, loopholes under the Provincial Residential Tenancies Act, such as subleases or due to a landlord living on the premises, are a much more likely case for evictions than in the inspections of municipal authorities. In the case of formal evictions, our data shows that literally all of the cases in Toronto's downtown east side are due to the accumulation of arrears as a result of Toronto's broader affordability crisis. Moreover, at this time, it is unclear whether these evictions were successfully carried out through the Landlord-Tenant Board. However, we know that evictions are always a threat for all tenants across Toronto. The FMTA tenant hotline alone, as referenced by city staff, which includes rental housing registered under Rent Safe and other residencies or other residents, registers over 700 eviction threats semi-annually, according to our latest data for the first 2 quarters of this year, from practices of bad landlords. To say that the MTH tenants face more threat of eviction than other tenants, particularly in the area in question, would require more further analysis and review of the data. And thus, while the threat of eviction from bad landlords is ever present for a wide variety of tenants across the City of Toronto, successful eviction rates in the multi-tenant housing are the exception, not the rule. To say that, and I quote, the MTH legalization framework undermines the tenant rights to housing instead of helping further realize tenants' right to housing, end quote, is a misunderstanding of the preliminary data we have presented. Further, this does not speak to the experiences of the FMTA staff on the ground with the tenants that we work with, nor is it the position supported by FMTA. We do, however, support the expansion of supports provided by to MTH tenants and to the organizations attempting to prevent MTH evictions. We are in full agreement with other tenant organizations that more investment in our collective ability to meet these challenges, particularly in the face of a provincial government which is not stepping up to resolve the longer-term issues that tenants face daily and is a crucial priority. We support further empowerment of the STAR table and to fulfill its promises. If I can just really wrap up very quickly, we want to make sure that we can continue to do the license, regulate, and protect tenants and do more to resource impacted tenants. So, thank you.
Thank you, Yaroslava. I would remind members of the committee who are joining us remotely to keep your camera on so that we can see you and we can also ensure that we continue to have quorum. Thank you. Are there questions to this speaker from any members of the committee? Gord, is that your hand up?
Thank you for that. I just want to make sure that I very clearly understood what you're saying. So from the data that you've collected, your sense is that while tenants generally are at risk, nothing specific in the multi-tenant housing program is creating that risk, but it's just the general risk that we have in Toronto. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Thank you. If you have more to add, go ahead.
Yeah, I would add that as a tenant in Toronto, that like we see this on a daily basis. Like the majority of our work is to be able to help prevent evictions. And one of the things that we have like seen over the last few decades is about the fact that when bad landlords want to evict tenants, they will use any and all excuses across the board to be able to do so. It doesn't matter whether like there is like increased regulation or deregulation, they are going to keep doing that. The regulations only help to be able to prevent those eviction threats from happening, from being able to be carried out. And I think that that's what the data is showing, that while the threats are there, we can try and mitigate those threats by actively working in community to be able to educate and advocate for tenant rights. So that's what I would say. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Are there other questions from the committee for Yaroslava? Thank you very much. That was helpful. And we have one more speaker to this item, who is here. Miguel Aviva, over to you. You have 5 minutes.
1 second, please.
Sure.
Let me hook up my laptop. Good morning. Good morning. My name is Miguel. I'm a TCAC resident, a housing activist for the last 15 years, and currently I'm being evicted from my unit. I'm facing eviction. In April 16, 2025, we received a visit from the Housing Secretariat in regards to an update of Rapid Housing Program Community Impact. They provide information to the Tenant Services Committee about the rate of success or unsuccessful tenancy in a multi-unit building. And it appears that only 5% are not successfully completing their tenancy. Those who are coming from the shelters and encampments. This is my building, 220 Oak Street. It's home for 485 units, almost 1,000 residents. Home of the new residents coming from the shelter and encampment system with no wraparound services. I have witnessed so many residents being evicted because they're not able to maintain their tenancy. We have an organization that helps tenants with mental health issues, COTA, but it seems not to be enough. There's downsides to this rehoming housing strategy that as every policy, it comes with victims. It comes with oversight. It comes with unattended consequences. I am one of those consequences of the tenancy of of residents that are coming from the shelter. And you can see in the picture, that is me sleeping on the floor of the gym in my building. For the last 12 months, I've been sleeping there. I've been calling useless to the calls to the CSU, the Community Safety Unit. I hear noises coming from residents that has recently arrived from the shelters and encampments in Unit 904 and 1104, above and below me. So I had lost hearing in both of my ears. My mental and physical health has further damaged. I paid rent on time. I'm not in arrears. What happened is the daily noises that I'm victim of is because the new arrivals stay awake during the night. There has been no consultation with the residents of 220 Oak Street, the long-term residents whose lives are now being affected by this rehoming housing strategy. On one hand, I salute you for addressing the crisis of housing. But on the other hand, I want to criticize you because it comes with additional problems that were not looked into it when you decided to transfer residents into my building because of the large vacancy rate. We have up to 62 units available through the year. A lot of people have died during the pandemic, or addictions, or suicide rates. So we have vacancies. But come on, at what cost? At the cost of sleep of tenants who have lived for 15 years. I lived in that building for 13 years of my life, and I always was able to sleep normally. But for the last 2 years, it's been one hell of experience to sleep at night and coming to work. This is my work, coming to speak to you guys, delivering the truths that you will do. Perhaps you don't want to hear it, but this is my reality. This is my living experiences. I'm sleeping to pay to live in the gym of my building. That shouldn't be that way. So I'm going to request Doug Rawlings, the Housing Secretariat, to listen to my letter that I have provided to him. I am making recommendations how to address this problem because my landlord says, Miguel, we cannot stop from housing people from the streets. I agree, but you have to be conscious. You have to be sensible that there are long-time residents that have a routine, that we sleep during the night, that we work during the day, and we pay rent on time. So please, soundproof my unit. That will allow me to have 8 hours of decent sleep instead of breaking my back, sleeping on a mat, on the floor, on a cold floor, and that's not acceptable. Please be equal, have a balance. Address the housing crisis, but don't screw up the life of the long-time residents like myself, who are aging in place in that building. Thank you.
Thank you, Miguel. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
To the committee, are there any questions for Miguel? Yes, Lindsay.
Thank you for that. So as somebody with lived experience who is currently living in community housing and has spoken with many of the tenants in my building, we do have the same concerns in terms of finding that balance between the already vulnerable residents that reside in the buildings and then the new residents coming in that do need more support and have created a lot of challenges for the building, for the staff to keep up with, and for the tenants that are residing here. And again, a lot of them vulnerable. So I fully agree with what Miguel is saying, and I'm interested in his recommendations, as well as I do have my own that I've been trying to communicate through our working groups as well, and I will continue to do so, because there does need to be a balance, as the infrastructure is so fragile, it could collapse either way. Now, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Can I respond to that?
Sure.
One of my I will provide my recommendations in writing to the clerk's office so she can share with the rest of the committee. The last recommendation I'd like to add is we need a transitional housing. Education for the future tenants to live in a population that is aging in place. They need to be aware of the roles and responsibilities, how to be a good neighbor, be able to turn down the music after 11, don't make noises during the night because we need to rest and I need to sleep. Right now, I only have 5 hours of sleep, but I'm here committed every single week, every single month, 365 days a week to come to City Hall because this is my job. This is my workplace. Thank you.
Thank you, Miguel, and thank you, Lindsay. Are there any other questions from the committee on this? I would suggest this is an issue that has come up a couple of times, as Lindsay said, at the working group, the first working group of this committee, and I would suggest that this continue to be an item that working group look at and dive into. So thank you, Miguel.
You're welcome.
Coming back to the item that we're looking at, which was the report from Dawn and Aisha. Are there other questions for the staff to the report? Yes, Annie.
Yeah, I have a few things just to comment on and a couple of questions. So thank you, Dawn and Aisha, for the presentation. I was just thinking, would it be possible to get the budgets for these programs, including how the need for services is determined and how budget allocations are decided for these programs, and then how those compare to other program budgets across the city. So I'm really thinking about the resource allocation decisions related to these programs take into consideration the need that tenants have, and then the city's right to housing commitment that includes directing maximum available resources to make sure people, and in particular those most at risk, have secure housing. So I'm just really curious about the resourcing there. The second reflection and sort of question I had was, is there a way organizations providing housing supports across the city can effectively and efficiently refer to EPIC and other programs? So this speaks to sort of a broader issue that I observed in my 6 years working directly with renters, managing renter services programs, and working with the city Housing and Homelessness Services Network coordination. Were sort of not clear lines of communication and connection among agencies often. So it was hard to, connect renters who are in crisis to the services they need. And I know a lot of this comes from resourcing constraints, but is there a way to sort of look at how those agencies could be brought together effectively so they can coordinate and streamline their services so people get what they need when they need it? We all, I think, in the service community heard the stories of, well, I'm really confused, I'm phoning around, I'm about to lose my home, there's a lot going on, and I'm getting answering machines and I can't access anything and I feel totally alone. So, is there ways we can do work towards more general coordination in addition to what STAR is doing? Because I think STAR will be more focused on targeted complex cases. And then relatedly, is STAR planning to make any policy recommendations based on sort of its first year of function? And if not, it might be helpful if it could. What are some of the wins? How could those be taken to make improvements across the system generally? And then the final thing was just, what can we do to help people who get evicted be rehoused? So when I sort of was ending my time doing that direct client work, increasingly tenants were saying, where do I go now? And there was no affordable housing in the city of Toronto that they could be referred to. I had started thinking, are there partnerships with other municipalities? And I mean, I don't want to displace people from their communities, but if they're in that situation where there's nothing available, like are there steps that we can take? So those were just sort of some questions and reflections I wanted to put on the table. Thanks.
Thank you, Annie. I'm going to give Dawn and Aisha a chance to respond, and then Harmy, you're next.
Thank you, Annie, for those thoughtful comments and suggestions. I can speak to a couple of the questions, and then I will hand it over to Leslie Jardine to speak to referrals to EPIC. Firstly, yes, absolutely, we can get you some of the budget information, so we will follow up with that information at a later date. Secondly, I will say that in terms of STAR assessing its performance and any gaps, we are doing that on an ongoing basis. It is early days, but we do expect to be monitoring the implementation of STAR and welcome any feedback as well as a STAR partner that you are as well. So with that, I will hand it over to Leslie.
Good morning, everyone. I can speak to EPIC. I'm the manager of the program, and so welcome this opportunity to answer any questions that come forward specifically. But for Annie, your question is about what I understand is more about access to the program. We've made a deliberate outreach to our partners within the community legal clinic. And so if anyone in the room, through friends or family or acquaintances, know that somebody is facing eviction, I would first encourage you to connect with a community legal clinic. They are our designated referral sources to allow first point of contact to be able to assist the person to understand the eviction process, and then more importantly, what types of supports and services they might need. And so that would be the first step I would recommend, Annie, and to anybody else.
Thank you. Harmy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is related to what I see named in a few of the written submissions and also some of the speakers today, and is specifically about the expansion of the mandate of the STAR table. I think that if I understood correctly, and I think that if I, just based on the scope of the table, community members are asking for the mandate to include policy monitoring and development. And I see that as an important alignment also in the context of this committee. For policy alignment, we know that it's complex from the standpoint of requirement, not only willingness, but ability to work with different areas of government. And so it's not as easy as we would want to hope. There might be some that could be easily included into the mandate. I guess the question is, how complex or how easy would it be to suggest that the STAR table include policy monitoring and development, not only the case management per se? Thank you. I apologize for my voice. If I need to repeat or speak louder, please do let me know. Thank you.
That was perfect, Harmy, and I think an excellent question. Matt, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Harmy. And through the chair, absolutely. That through the council reports on the establishment of the HEART table and now the STAR table where we are, one of the key functions that we're building into that table, and as Aisha has mentioned, this is us working with our colleagues in social development quite early, but a key function is to take the learnings from responding to those situations of tenants at risk to inform systemic change recommendations at the sort of city policy level, but also recommendations for other orders of government. So absolutely, today was just sort of an introduction to where we've started with STAR, and we have more work to do in that regard, but we'll certainly be continuing to engage this committee, I expect, on the STAR table and give you more of a line of sight as we roll this table out into how the sort of findings in terms of systemic change, policy change, program change that are needed are identified through that table and brought up to the appropriate place within the city or other orders of government.
I'm just going to follow on, Harmy, to the question. So a number of suggestions were made today in the submissions, in the presentations. At what point can we, as a committee, expect to hear back from you on what you're incorporating as the STAR table? Because you're right, it's nascent, it's still being fully formed. What's an appropriate time to ask you to come back and give us an update on the shape of it?
Sure, thanks for the question. I would say that we've got some important reports going to council this fall, a report back on the council recommendations coming out of the Ombudsman's investigation, as well as the first annual report on the implementation of the multi-tenant homes framework. So I would expect that early next year might be a good time for us to have directed whatever direction we get from council out of those items that may relate to STAR, and come forward with some more information for this committee if that was something the committee wanted to see.
Great, thank you. We don't need a motion to invite them back. We can just invite them back. Yes, thank you. Just getting my technical things. Saroja, you have your hand up.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, so I think I really appreciate the FMTA's clarification on their data related to eviction numbers and that they're making a proactive effort to collect this data, but also noting that it's specific to the downtown east area. And I'm really hearing from all the submissions that we need to collect more data and more accurate data on the displacement of MTH tenants, which we don't really have at this time. And I'm also concerned that waiting for this data to be collected and analyzed to take action might take a very long time. And while this is happening, we should also be really focusing on prevention and preservation. And so, yeah, I think the piece about providing strong supports in many different languages for current MTH tenants, as well as landlord education around the MTH bylaw, I think is super pressing right now. And I totally hear that we also should be exploring this idea of a Toronto emergency rooming house response. As my understanding, this idea came about in the early 2000s, so it's kind of mind-blowing that we kind of forgot about it, and now we're trying to really revisit that. And I think it's potentially more urgent than we realize. And so while I understand that we might not have the data on evictions related to the MTH bylaw being in place right now because it's still early, I also think that we need to take action as soon as possible on prevention, specifically supporting MTH tenants and providing specialized supports for MTH tenants, which I think there might be a bit of a gap in. After I heard all the presentations, seemed like they were focused generally on all types of evictions, but I just really want to emphasize the need to specifically have specialized programs for MTH tenants. Thank you.
Thank you, Saroja. I'm looking to the committee if there are any further questions. Diana.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just curious because the spider table had a larger mandate than the star table does in terms of who it's serving. So we've actually narrowed that mandate with the focus of STAR, and I'm wondering how the services that were formerly provided by Spider to other forms of tenants have been offset.
Thanks for the question. The mandate of Spider wasn't narrowed when it comes to STAR. It's just the mandate of Spider is being enhanced because given the large amount of housing situations that were coming through the table. So the partnership and the co-lead with the Housing Secretariat allows us to provide a deeper focus on those housing related situations beyond what we used to do in Spider.
Follow up, or that's good. Gord.
Yeah, Matt, this issue about emergency response in rooming houses, I've had a lot of experience with it over the years when I was legalizing rooming houses in Parkdale. We have had agreements continuously and still do. We just changed the provider from, I forget who it was, to the Red Cross. But we do have an emergency agreement in place right now. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. Through the Toronto Emergency Management with the Red Cross, there is emergency services for tenants who are displaced in the event of fire or if the city needs to take action to close a home.
Are there any further questions from the committee before we close this item? So I would conclude that we will be inviting representatives from STAR to come back and give us an update as it takes more shape. I understand that you're going to take the concerns that have been raised, both by the submissions and by the questions of the committee. And this is a forming committee that we hope to help shape alongside so that it is human rights informed and people are getting what they need, that we're collecting the data that we need, and the policy changes are informed the way that they need to be. So thank you very much. Thank you, Don and Aisha, for the presentation. And we now can go to the next item, which is oh, sorry, I need a motion to receive the item. Thank you, Gord. All in favor, can I please see a show of hands? Army? Thank you. Chase and B, are your hands up? We can't hear you. I need to see your hand up or hear it. Are we good? Well, I think we may have lost Chase. Is Chase still online? Camera is off. Chase or B, if you could please audibly say approve. What's that? Or no. Yeah, you can say no, but we need to hear. We will move on and confirm with you, circle back. Moving on to the next item. We have the Ombudsman Toronto Housing Unit Update, implementation of the recommendations from item CC 30.3, Ombudsman Toronto report an investigation into the city's response to a vital services outage in a multi-tenant home. This is an update from the Deputy Ombudsman Housing, Rima Patel, on the Ombudsman Toronto Housing Unit's work to help the city implement the recommendations in its report. An investigation into the city's response to a vital services outage in a multi-tenant home. This will also include advice to support the city's application of the Toronto Housing Charter. Welcome, Rima.
Thank you. Just getting started.
Do you want to just speak?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks. Through the chair, thank you to the committee for having us today. My name is Rima Patel. I'm the Deputy Ombudsman for Housing at Ombudsman Toronto. I'm here with my colleague Luke Brown, who is Ombudsman Investigations Counsel. You can see we're having a bit of trouble getting the presentation up, but I'm just going to speak and hopefully it'll appear. So as the chair said, I'm here to speak to you a little bit about the recommendations that Ombudsman Toronto had made with respect to our most recent investigation into a vital services outage at a rooming house in Toronto. A little roadmap for what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to give the briefest of briefest updates or overviews of what the Ombudsman Toronto Housing Unit is. I'm going to talk to you a bit about the purpose and our legal mandate around recommendations relating to our work. I'm going to give a very brief overview of the Vital Services investigation. I have spoken about it here, but I think a little refresher could be helpful. I'm going to talk then about two recommendations specifically from that work that I wanted to update the committee about today. Okay. Brief overview. So, the Ombudsman is an independent statutory authority who conducts investigations into the administration of city services. In my role as Deputy Ombudsman Housing, I lead a specialized housing unit within the Ombudsman's office, which has the purpose of holding the city to account on its commitments made under the Housing Charter. A bit of the work that we do includes conducting systemic investigations into the city's delivery of housing services, conducting systems reviews, consulting proactively with city staff, and also engaging with community. So to explain a little bit about recommendations, when we do our investigative work, we focus on finding solutions to broad systemic issues at the city by recommending clear and practical ways that the city can improve its service so that the problems that we've identified in our investigations are prevented from happening again. A big part of this work is drafting recommendations that are welcomed and understood by the city, that are easily actioned and effectively implemented. Our recommendations are not legally binding, which means that the city has to accept them in order for them to be implemented. And at the end of the day, our recommendations emphasize administrative fairness, the right to adequate housing, and accountability. Our authority to investigate comes from the City of Toronto Act, but it's the Municipal Code, the Toronto Municipal Code, Chapter 3, which says that after we do an investigation, the Ombudsman shall recommend any measures necessary to rectify the matter. That is our legal standing to make recommendations. A big part of the work that we do involves monitoring the implementation of the recommendations we make. It largely happens quietly after reports are tabled and reports go to council, but we put a lot of resources into this work. Before we finalize an investigation report, we give the city the opportunity to provide critical feedback on whether the recommendations that we've come up with are achievable, whether they're in keeping with their council-directed mandates, and whether they're actually sound. So that's a bit of work that we do before we finalize the recs. After we finalize our reports, we then contact the city to discuss an agreed-upon reporting timetable so that we can monitor the implementation of those recs and sort of slowly work to review and check them off. We communicate regularly depending on the work that's involved and as needed. And once the Ombudsman is satisfied that all the recommendations have been fully implemented, we then communicate to the city that our role on this work is complete. Monitoring the implementation of recommendations is Ombudsman best practice. It's a model that's implemented by several other ombudsman bodies, for example, the Ontario Ombudsman, the BC Ombudsperson, the Montreal Ombudsman, It's a process that we feel works quite well. We provide advice. The city can ask questions and seek clarifications until the spirit of the recommendation is implemented. Very brief overview of our investigation, which it seems nobody needs, but I'll just do it anyways. I've discussed this in this investigation at HRAC, but in 2024, we launched an investigation to look into the city's response to requests from rooming house tenants for the city to help restore heat, water, and electricity in their building after a fire. The city's Municipal Licensing and Standards Division had the power to investigate and push the landlord to restore the services, but didn't investigate adequately or enforce the bylaws. We looked at also the city's Housing Secretariat's EPIC program, who we found declined to help tenants. We made a series of findings, 2 of which I'm going to get into detail a bit later, and we made 27 recommendations. So, of those 2 key findings I want to talk about, one of them is that EPIC lacked clear policies and procedures. We found that there was no written policy or process to help guide EPIC's delivery of emergency assistance to tenants facing displacement, and further, tenants faced undue delay when EPIC took over a month to respond to a request for help. The second key finding I want to talk about is city staff's actions were inconsistent with commitments made under the Toronto Housing Charter. The lack of bylaw enforcement impacted the adequacy of housing experienced by the tenants in this case, who were living in safe, uninhabitable conditions, which you could read about in the report. I want to move on to talk a little bit about a part of the Toronto Housing Charter called Implementation Step 2. The Toronto Housing Charter adopts a human rights-based approach to housing, and it works to push the needle further on the realization of the right to adequate housing. It details this human rights-based approach by rooting it in principles of adequacy, participation and inclusion, and non-discrimination. The Housing Charter then goes on to list 13 specific commitments to guide the city in its decision-making, resource allocation, policy development, and provision of services and programs. Implementation Step 2 reads, or basically says that it requires any future city decisions, policies, services, and programs that impact housing to be screened and assessed for impact on the Toronto Housing Charter, and for the city to revise them as appropriate to ensure that the city's policy as stated in the Toronto Housing Charter is achieved and not negatively impacted. So I want to talk now about a couple of the 2 recommendations that I came here to talk to you about today. Recommendation 4, and I'll just read it for you and talk a bit more about it later. It says, in consultation with the Housing Secretariat and as required by the Toronto Housing Charter, MLS should revise its standard operating procedures relevant to rental housing standards enforcement to consider impacts on the right to adequate housing, including preserving affordable housing under the Housing TO Action Plan. This revision process should include the bylaw compliance and enforcement policy, the general investigation standard operating procedure, the priority response standard operating procedure, the remedial action standard operating procedure, and the vital services standard operating procedure. A standard operating procedure guides bylaw officers in their approach to enforcing bylaws. So some of the recent work that we've done with MLS to support the implementation of Recommendation 4. At MLS's request, we held a workshop with MLS staff to review the priority response standard operating procedure and assess it for alignment with the principles and commitments made in the Toronto Housing Charter. what we did was pick one specific document to workshop with staff, so that after that workshop, they'd be able to then take what they learned in the workshop and apply it to the rest of the standard operating procedures that we recommended that they review. In doing so, in doing this workshop, we sat down with staff and using some real examples, we asked guiding questions about the document. So for example, when an actual bylaw violation involves a threat to housing adequacy, does anything in this document help staff understand that the housing charter should be applied to how they handle the file? So it was really going through the document to make sure that it was explicit to bylaw officers what they had to do in order to make sure that the housing charter's principles were applied. We asked staff whether the procedure allowed for the participation of residents in decisions that affect them, which is a principle of the right to adequate housing. We asked whether the procedure made it clear whether people have the information about decision-making processes and their implications. We also asked whether the procedure could potentially limit staff actions that could result in residents losing housing or make them subject to arbitrary eviction. We continue to make ourselves available to MLS staff should they need any assistance in screening their own SOPs. And once they finish their reviews, we'll have a look to see if they need any further advice. The second recommendation I wanted to speak to you a bit about is recommendation 21 from our report, which says that the Housing Secretariat should consult with Ombudsman Toronto in its upcoming review and revision of EPIC's policy framework to ensure consistency with the principles of administrative fairness and the right to adequate housing. We've talked a bit about EPIC here today. Through both our regular complaint resolution work at Ombudsman Toronto, as well as the evidence that was gathered under this particular investigation, our office has a unique vantage point into how EPIC is working from a resident point of view. What we did then was we compiled some of the fairness and right to housing concerns that we've seen through both this file and other files we've reviewed throughout the years, and given it to the Housing Secretariat. They are using this document to help inform their ongoing review of the EPIC policy framework, and we are connecting with them and offering advice on their revised policy drafts. Some of the broad areas of advice that we had for them involved defining and publicly communicating EPIC's mandate and their scope of services, clarifying who can make service requests and how, developing fair and transparent eligibility criteria, developing materials for city staff on best practices for fulfilling EPIC's mandate, developing protocols and service standards for communicating with people seeking EPIC services, developing and communicating an appeal review process, and developing protocols for oversight and improvement. So that was generally some of the advice that we had given them based on what we've seen in our review. I'm sorry that the presentation didn't load. I hope that was clear, and I'm available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And for the benefit of the committee members, the presentation itself is available online so that you can take a closer look at it. But in the immediate now, are there questions for Rima or Luke on the presentation or the work that they've been undertaking? Looking to the committee. I have one question. You talked about working with city staff on recommendation 4 and recommendation 27. It sounds like a very productive process. As someone monitoring this from the outside, do you feel that this is achieving some of the intended goals in terms of seeing a more human rights compliant policy environment?
Thank you for the question. Through the chair, we haven't finished our work on monitoring the implementation of these recommendations, but to date, I can say that it has been quite good, this working relationship. I think we came together in a spirit of open dialogue and wanting to, achieve the same goals here. And that's definitely been visible to me through both the workshop that we had with MLS staff as well as our conversations with the Housing Secretariat on their work to review the EPIC policy framework.
Thank you. Yes, Sarota.
Yeah, thank you for this really enlightening report. I think I'd be curious to know now with the new budget for MLS and more staff as well as more training on preventing emergency situations as well as supporting our most vulnerable tenants in MTH homes, how the implementation of this work will improve, especially with this report coming out and recommendations to review the gaps in this program. And I'm also just wondering about the emergency response when it comes to the Red Cross. Councillor Perks mentioned the City of Toronto has an emergency service through the Red Cross for MTH tenants, and I'm curious how that comes into play with a situation like this and how the Ombudsman reviewed that work as well, if there was any in this specific situation with the outage.
Thank you for those questions. Through the chair, I will address them one by one. So for your first question about, I guess maybe it was a concern as well as a question about how, this work will improve things for residents. I think our work right now is to help MLS and the city get their policies and SOPs in place at the moment. I think work to monitor implementation of that work will rest with MLS. So the point at which we are right now is we're not quite there. To answer your second question about emergency services provided under the Red Cross and how did that, I think, if I'm understanding the question, how did we review that as part of our investigation? Yeah, I think there's different ways that we can define the term emergency response. All the information that we gathered in our investigation came from interviews with city staff from the Housing Secretariat to Toronto Emergency Management. Our report was reviewed by city staff in the end. I think potentially what you've maybe touched on comes up a bit in our finding that the EPIC program's scope and mandate was unclear, which is one of the findings that we made. And some of the work that we're doing with EPIC in our monitoring of recommendation implementation is to work with them on clarifying their mandate and scope of services that they provide. So that's sort of where we come in on that work.
Thank you. One last opportunity for questions from the committee. Diana, is that a hand?
Yeah, I'm just, I guess I'm a little bit confused because we do have the Red Cross as the emergency. This would have been the program that should have been servicing people in this particular situation. we're talking about looking at the mandate of EPIC. Wouldn't that not include service duplication then, if we already have a contract with the Red Cross to do that work? You're talking about emergency meaning many different things. Can you just clarify what you mean by that and how this kind of lives in different programs?
Thank you. Through the chair, our understanding of emergency response in this particular situation extends to more intensive, longer-term services associated with securing alternate housing on a temporary or permanent basis, as well as coordinating the return to one's housing. And our understanding is that EPIC provides these services. That was the evidence that we had gathered through our investigation. My understanding of Red Cross, and this is not something that we investigated in this particular investigation, but my understanding of the services that Red Cross provides is that they are more immediate services that are provided to support people who face sudden displacement, so food, temporary accommodation, and that's what I understand to be the difference.
I'm not overly familiar with the situation, besides what you've described and what I've heard from others, but haven't looked into it myself. So that caveat's in place. But it seems still, given that they did not have vital services like water, for example, heat, that still would constitute the kind of emergency that the Red Cross actually, doing this work frontline, would be responding to. So again, I'm just worried that there's an expansion of the mandate of EPIC that would create this service duplication and stretch a program like EPIC too thin. So those are just my concerns with this particular piece.
Thanks, and point well taken. Our work is not to recommend an expansion of service mandate. Our work is to help them clarify their mandate. That's the role that the Ombudsman would play in that situation.
Are there any further questions? Then I would say thank you very much, Rima and Luke, for joining us today. And I would put forward a motion to receive this item. Does anybody want to speak on it first? Sorry. I'm a terrible chair. Does anybody want to speak on the item? Not seeing any hands going up, I will then therefore move to receive the item. Can I please see a show of hands? Thank you very much. All in favor? I can't see B or Chase. If you're on the line, I would ask you to unmute and say in favor or opposed. Oh, Chase, there's your hand. Thank you. That's in favor. Great.
Favor.
Thanks, B. That was approved.
Favor.
In favor. Thank you very much. Then motion carried. Thank you. Thank you. And we move on to the next item, which is 7.5, supporting unhoused rights holders, working group chair update. That is over to Diana Chan McNally. So over to you.
Yeah, I mean, the greatest update would be that I am the chair of this working group. So that is a great update. So hello, thank you. As well, what we discussed at our working group, we had a presentation about the city's coordinated access system, which I think for some of us did illuminate a lot of how this actually works, but for others, we had questions about service navigation. And what came out of that presentation, I think, is the fact that many of us, especially folks with lived experience who work frontline, do lack a lot of clarity around all the pathways that are available to people, both through city programs, also city-supported programs, into permanent housing. And so this kind of culminated in myself, as well as the chair of HRAC, submitting letters to ECDC to somewhat piggyback off of an agenda item that was already present. So that would be EC 23.6, what is the title of that? Sorry. Toronto's multi-divisional response to the needs of people experiencing homelessness. And what we're seeing in that committee is that there is a resource inventory that is being created of services that are available to people who are experiencing homelessness. Now, our concerns, which were raised in the working group, is that merely having an inventory doesn't actually clarify what the real movement is of people through those particular services. So we are requesting from ECDC, again, which is culminated in a letter which has been submitted on this agenda item, that we expand this inventory to actually include a map of all of the available pathways for someone who's homeless, whether they're sheltered or unsheltered, into permanent housing. Again, this is something that if we're going to evaluate the human rights outcomes of these programs, we need to understand, again, how people move through them. So ECDC is happening right now, and hopefully we'll learn in the near future what the status of that letter happens to be. I think that's kind of the main focus of what we talked about, but we also talked about triaging folks. We talked about the by name list and how this may miss certain folks as well. And otherwise, we're looking at accountability as well, not just through these pathways into housing, but in the shelter system overall. So understanding that we do have members of our working group who do live in the shelter system, that we do need to have further accountability for how these services actually operate for the folks who actually are currently residing in them. As well, we did speak about folks living outdoors and that there needs to be more active participation in engaging with folks about their particular needs and ensuring that they are receiving equitable services to other folks who are in other situations of homelessness, including within the shelter system. Next steps, we are hoping to actually have a discussion with TUHU, which is the Toronto Unhoused and Homeless Union. We will be inviting them to our next working group meeting to learn a little bit more about their work and ways that we can potentially support it. So that is my update. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. To the members, before we ask questions of Diana, we do have speakers registered for this item, and so I turn to the clerk to see who is ready online. Callum is first on the list. Is Callum Houston available? There's a phone number that begins with 514 that's online? We don't know. Okay. Is Stephanie available?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
There is Stephanie. Stephanie, you are on.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you fine folks letting me have a chance to speak today. I'm currently at the Dufferin Grove encampment in the Dufferin Grove neighborhood, and I just want to take a few minutes today to talk about what I have experienced here with the encampment office and their interactions with folks living in this park. While I myself do not live in this park currently, I have been a friend and a neighbor to folks who have, and I've witnessed firsthand the level of harassment that the encampment office has perpetuated here. That is to say, I have heard verbatim encampment office staff members say to park residents, you need to take down your tent. We don't really care where you go. You can pitch it in another park. You just can't have it here, with zero offer for shelter space or housing. Relatedly, I've heard as recently as a month ago, someone was told to take down their tent without a conversation about shelter space or housing. They were just told to leave, or otherwise the encampment office would call the police. My understanding is that is in complete contravention of the interdivisional protocol. And I want to make it known to this committee that these interactions are happening day to day, week to week. Currently, as I'm standing in the park, the Dufferin Grove Clubhouse at the northwest corner of the park, that's usually open to the public. There's usually cooking classes, there's usually all kinds of programming throughout the day on Tuesday, is closed because there's a bunch of encampment officers in there, there's a bunch of security personnel in there, and I believe there's a bunch of Toronto police officers there who have set up a kind of ad hoc command post. And that is because trespass notices were served to every single tent on Friday for removal today at 9 a.m. And so I say this to say that I'm very curious, as per Diana, how many people have gotten housing, how many people have stayed in permanent housing, how many people have received shelter space, and how many people have been displaced into the ether. So I hope this deputation is useful insight to folks on this committee as someone who is on the ground here supporting people. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'd like to open it to the committee if there are any questions for you, Stephanie, before you go to the committee. Are there any questions for Stephanie? Diana.
Thank you for your deputation, Stephanie. Just to clarify, eviction notices were served to all residents in the park?
Trespass notices were served to every single person with a tent in the park on Friday, yes.
And there are currently officers, other city staff, personnel stationed in the park?
Yes, they're currently stationed in the Dufferin Grove Clubhouse.
And what's happening right now?
So folks in the encampment, there are folks and their supporters. There's probably about 40 of them. They're kind of milling about, worried, wondering what's going to happen. Right now, there's nothing much going on. It's just that the clubhouse is closed, the blinds are drawn, doors are locked, and we're waiting to see what's going to happen.
And can you clarify to us, if you know, and you may not, that's all right, what is the understanding of the residents in the park and why they were served these notices?
Well, given that I can't speak for all the residents, I'll try my best to answer your question. Their understanding is that this is an escalation on the part of the encampment office. Over the months from Feb 1st to now, which is February 1st is when the enhanced outreach model for Dufferin Grove began, in which no new tents could be pitched. From then until now, trespass notices were indeed served one-off to new tents pitched, but never up until this date has trespass notices been served to every single tent. And so this is a clear escalation on the part of the encampment office because nobody here has received adequate housing offers, and hence why they continue to stay.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for that. Those are my questions.
To the committee, are there any other questions for this speaker? Stephanie, thank you for joining us and bringing that to our attention. I appreciate your deputation this morning. I believe we have another speaker. Is Callum on the line? Okay, so there is no other speaker. Thank you. To the members of the committee, are there any speakers to the item of Diana's report on the Unhoused Working Group report? Yes, Diana.
If I may speak further, there was a great irony in sitting on a committee that is discussing housing rights when there have been eviction notices given to people who do not have adequate housing. And so for this reason, it's very hard for me to ameliorate this in my brain. I have a motion, actually, on this that I hopefully can be brought up on the screen. Thank you. I am curious about the enhanced outreach model and about the IDP overall, and I think understanding the mandate of this particular committee and understanding that we are involved in reviewing and evaluating the human right to housing in terms of city policies, protocols, and programs, we need to understand what the outcome of the enhanced outreach model actually is. And so for this reason, I'm asking for specific data points about the number of encampment residents who have been displaced to an unknown location while the enhanced outreach model has been applied, the number of shelter offers, the number of housing offers that have been both accepted and refused, both prior to the serving of eviction notices and afterward. And I'd also like to understand, again, so we can evaluate the human rights outcomes here, is that how many folks who accepted a shelter offer have actually received permanent housing, and as well the number of encampment residents who accepted a shelter bed who have returned outside or have exited the shelter system. So I think it's incredibly important for us to understand this information in order, again, to evaluate the effectiveness and the human right outcomes of the enhanced outreach model. So thank you.
Thank you. And before we go to the motion, I'd like to make that available to staff if there's a response to any of those questions. No? So I just want to comment before I'll open it to others to comment on the motion as well. I think that this is really important as part of our work of the Housing Rights Advisory Committee. The enhanced outreach model is an important step forward in a rights-based approach to working with encampments, but we need to understand how well it's working. We need to have very clear and transparent human rights outcomes that we are monitoring for and can point to. I don't believe that we get anything absolutely right the first time. And so I think this is an opportunity to step back and take stock. There is something happening at this moment, and we don't have all of the information that we would be able to have to say, yes, we have hit it, or no, we have not. And so I just to support the motion, but I will pause there and allow anyone else on the committee who wants to weigh in on this or ask a question. Yes, Lindsay.
I'm not sure in that if there was an opportunity for those who are offered, whether they accepted or, well, I guess more so if they rejected an offer, as to why they didn't accept the offer. I think that would be important as well.
Is that captured by the questions that you're asking?
I don't know that the reasoning would be necessarily captured. That reasoning may not always be clear, but if it is available, it can be absolutely, I think, part of the data that we are collecting. Should be.
I think it's actually really important, yeah.
I agree, Lindsay, because I think that's part of understanding the fullness of someone's situation and what kind of options are available to them. I don't think we want to reduce this to a simple set of numbers. I think we want to understand, be able to get a handle on the complexity of people's decisions. So thank you for that, Lindsay.
Do the city staff agree?
Yes. City staff is in full agreement. With that, and I'm not seeing any of the other hands going up.
Elizabeth?
Yes. B, is that you? B, is that you? Okay, I'm not here. Go, sorry.
Huh?
Go ahead.
Okay. I think the motion I totally agree. Because I'm going to say, like, I mean, the shelter I'm in, I think you guys already know that I mentioned a few times, they just, either keep people out or they transfer people to another shelter, right? If the client live more than 6 months. So last Friday, I met with the manager and then the housing supervisor, and they already make up their mind. I didn't have a chance to explain or say anything. They give me two choices. Either I accept RTI housing, but not on my choice, because I asked, can I see the place? They said no. Whatever come up, either you accept it or you will get transferred to another shelter. I don't know, in that case, like, transfer to another shelter is that, it doesn't mean I got my housing, right? I kind of, I think I did question this thing in the TSS forum about the what's the word? The accuracy of the data. Because I think I mentioned before, like, this girl get kicked out and then she come back 6 months later. back to the shelter again. I don't know what to say. So I think the motion, to ask the city staff to look up the data. I think it's important to keep not keep an eye, but to find out. It's really people, I mean, it's so good, right? Oh, somebody is moving out and somebody is coming in, right? To them, it's shock. I'm not prisoner. I don't have to be shocked. And so I think it is also something with the management operation of the shelter, city-run shelter. I have no problem with the agency one. So, yeah, I don't know what else to say. So I think it's good motion to get more transparency and more accurate data on this, whether people are housed or just a swap, transfer, and then come back. Thank you.
Thank you, B. And I think those are important extra layers for us to consider as we put this request forward. So if there are no other questions or comments at this time, we have a motion on the table. Can I move to see a show of hands for all those in favor? Let's see the cameras on, please. B, I'm going to take that as a yes from you. Chase, Nicole, great, thank you. And Diana, thank you. And that is carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Diana. And I'll just add that I've been informed that the motion that or the submission that you mentioned at ECDC has been approved. So, well done. This takes us forward to item 7.6, the Maintaining Housing Working Group Chair update. This is an update provided by the Chair on the discussion and outcomes of their meeting. And for that, maintaining, that is to Annie.
Thank you. And just sorry that I can't be there in person today. I'm not able to be there for health reasons. So our working group met on July 21st with two key focuses. So we hosted a roundtable discussion on addressing gaps to maintaining housing and preventing evictions. And we were really grateful that 6 representatives from agencies across the city who work directly with renters facing housing instability and eviction shared their expertise and experience. And then the committee talked about reviewing our priorities given the number of meetings available to us before this committee term ends. So our goal was to streamline, and we landed on 2 key priorities that I'll talk about at the end of this, where we hope to dig deeper and drive forward some concrete progress related to the city's commitments under the Toronto Housing Charter and the human right to housing. So during that consultation, we heard a number of different topics that, as a former direct service provider myself, were quite consistent with what the challenges have been for quite a long time. The group confirmed that arrears for non-payment of rent remains by far the most common type of eviction they hear about. Keeping people housed means both ensuring there are enough deeply affordable options, as well as enough other supports that people can reach out to when they need them. And some of those ongoing challenges were identified. The group talked about how Legal Aid Ontario clinics are overburdened and that other orders of government have a role to play to fill the gaps if the province will not. Lack of awareness of housing rights is a big barrier that can lead to housing loss. So in particular, newcomers, youth, and survivors of gender-based violence often face increased barriers. The group highlighted that many newcomers and youth are in informal housing arrangements, including multi-tenant housing and rooming houses, and they're at greater risk and they need supports and knowledge of their rights. The group talked about how often we hear from TCHC tenants, many of whom need proactive supports, including mental health and other issues to avoid eviction. People highlighted some more specific issues like how repayment of TCHC damage charges are often unrealistic for tenants on OW and ODSP, creating eviction risk. We also talked about how the need to reapply for RG GI can often lead to confusion with all the paperwork, and people get threatened with eviction as a result at times. Evictions from TCHC feed into the shelter system, which is costly and traumatic. We talked about how survivors of gender-based violence face barriers in accessing the province's special priority housing. Many end up vulnerable to private market arrangements that are not stable. We talked about the long wait lists and lack of phone access for some people that can prevent tenants from getting timely support. Those who attended said that about half of some caseworkers felt their clients lose their housing due to limited supports. And we talked about how tenants on social assistance, which is a protected ground, so receipt of social assistance is protected under the Ontario Human Rights Code in housing, but they still face a lot of discrimination in accessing housing, and that some landlords are raising rents after learning tenants receive the Canada-Ontario housing benefit. So when it came to streamlining our priorities, we talked about focusing on eviction prevention and then the implementation of the multi-tenant housing framework. So in terms of eviction prevention, we were talking about if the city doesn't already have one, could the city develop a method to measure the true demand for eviction prevention services, as maintaining tenancies is one of the most effective ways to prevent homelessness and reduce pressure on emergency services. We also talked about maximum available resources that should be directed toward funding support programs for people facing eviction. A method for determining what maximum available resources means in this context could be explored if that's not already been explored. We talked about disaggregated data and how it's essential to identify who's at risk, track outcomes, and strengthen advocacy efforts. We thought perhaps data analysis could guide enhancements to better target services for high needs clients. The committee also wanted to seek some clarity on what data is currently captured in the TGRIP system and whether improvements can be made to better serve community needs. When it came to multi-tenant rates, we talked about how multi-tenant housing, we wanted to know how many have closed and how many rooms have been lost to date, recognizing that the process is still at the beginning and perhaps that data is not available. What is the average cost for operators to comply with the bylaw? And does this typically lead to closures or rent increases? What issues are arising during appeals and how can they be addressed or mitigated? How is the success of the multi-tenant housing framework being evaluated? And noting that Right to Housing Toronto is working on a method of that. What are the current multi-tenant housing rent levels? Are new rooming houses being created and which populations do they serve? How will the city adjust or course correct if implementation is not achieving its goals? And are they meeting recognized criteria for adequate housing under the 7 elements of the right to housing? And then without going on too long, I just wanted to sort of some contextual notes before just talking about next steps. Although it may seem obvious, eviction is one of the primary pathways into homelessness, yet despite this, the urgency of preventing evictions is often not fully recognized and prioritized, in my experience. Intervening to arrest housing insecurity at this point is a critical and powerful way to stop homelessness from increasing across the city. Having personally worked directly with hundreds of renters facing eviction and discrimination in their housing, I've seen how eviction threats often coexist with other challenging life circumstances and how losing one's home can and does lead to the deterioration of people's health and lives. And that was reflected in a lot of the comments in the consultation. So as we know, in the worst case scenario, people can die when they lose their homes. In other cases, their mental health can deteriorate, their children are removed from their communities, seniors can be removed from their circle of care, to name just a few examples. So there must be more focus and resources dedicated to keeping people from being displaced and evicted. And Toronto is committed to this in its housing plan and charter. So we know that governments know, at least in theory, that evictions remain a major driver of homelessness. homelessness, but data is missing and incomplete, particularly data on who is threatened with eviction and how often people are threatened. Many people leave their homes without going to a tribunal. So there's a lot of missing data there, and I know the city's working on trying to get that. So we really need to shift the focus, I think, of social services and supports from the crisis response to like shelters to promoting security of tenure and eviction prevention. And that was really what came out of that consultation as well. So next steps, I'll just end with the next steps on eviction prevention. To understand groups at risk of eviction, how and when evictions are prevented, and opportunities to improve eviction prevention supports, the working group would like to request an overview of city collected data from the Toronto Grants, Rebates, and Incentives portal with respect to eviction prevention and housing stability services. The group wanted to learn more about planning and coordination work the city is doing to more accurately measure and meet the scope of demand for services for renters facing eviction, and explore whether additional funds could be directed to support these housing stability services, applying the maximum available resources in alignment with the city's Toronto Housing Charter commitment to progressively realize the right to adequate housing. Anecdotally, people that work frontline with these renters know the need is very great. And then in terms of multi-tenant rooming houses, to better understand the current landscape of licensed and unlicensed MTHs in Toronto, the working group will review options to engage with and potentially invite Fred Victor, Community of Practice on MTHs, to an HRAC meeting and a meeting of the Maintaining Housing Working Group. And then we will continue to connect with Right to Housing Toronto on a rights-based framework and analysis that they're applying to the implementation of the housing framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. That was a great update and obviously a lot of work from the working group. So thank you to all the members as well. To the members of the committee, are there any questions on this item? All right, it was very well explained. Are there any speakers to the item among the committee? Seeing none, I would move to receive this item. Can I please see a show of hands in terms of those who are in favor? Online, looking for your hands. Thank you very much. Sarota, that's a yes. B, can I hear approve? It's not approve. In favor or opposed, B? You're on. Is that approved? In favor? We're going to circle back to you after to confirm whether you're in favor or opposed. And thank you, Annie.
Yeah, in favor.
In favor. Thank you so much, B. All right, great. And then motion carried. Thank you. Our next item is 7.7, Improving Access to Housing Working Group Chair Update, and that is to Anne Marie. Anne Marie, you have the floor.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anne Marie. I'm vice chair to this committee, but chair to working group number 4, which is improving access to housing. I'm going to be speaking a little bit about the last or fourth meeting, which was on July the 14th. And I'm happy to know that we have some guests in our midst who was part of that meeting. So as a follow-up to an invitation that was sent by myself and as the chair for working group meeting number 4, and also the chair of this committee, Elizabeth, we actually invited the Center for Independent Living and GTA Disability to actually show up at our working group meeting. And there was conversation about how our work aligned, and we wanted to bring them to the working group meeting just to kind of like have a further deep dive into the work that we're doing and how it could complement what they're doing. With that, I want to acknowledge Kim and David, who's in this meeting, I believe. who attended the meeting on July the 14th. We will have a presentation from them at some point this morning, of which you'll learn a little bit more about how we aligned and how we can move forward and work together in collaboration on or improving access to housing. As a result of that consultative engagement with the working group, the scope of the conversation really was around their mandate and how that aligns with what we're doing at HRAC. And also from that discussion, we had invited them to be at this meeting today. So you'll hear a little bit more after I am finished giving you some updates on working group number 4. The remainder of our group discussion for that meeting was pretty much focused primarily on 3 main points, and I'll just briefly go over these 3 main points so we could get on with the remainder of the business. So we talk about accountability, we talk about accessibility and disaggregated data. We centered mainly on these 3 key aspects, again, accountability, accessibility, and disaggregated data. Around accountability, the conversation was, we was more asking pointed questions about who's accountable for ensuring the new set of universal design standards and how that is applied during the development of the City of Toronto affordable housing design guidelines as it was put forward by Council. And we moved on into accessibility, which I know I've heard some conversation since this morning about aging in place. So we had some discussions around that too, aging in place and how that should be regarded as a human right, and housing adequately is also imperative in the work that we're doing here, enabling that rights-based holders do have there's this understanding that they have the right to maintain tenure, ensuring that housing is accessible and meet their needs. A critical point of our discussion was on the accessibility conversation that was centered on the challenges associated with implementing the accessibility modifications in older buildings, and how does that compare to the new TCHC buildings? The last thing we talked about was disaggregated data. Lastly, we look at this topic in respect to regarding the existing data gaps and as it pertains to the City of Toronto and to individuals who are living with disabilities. So that was the main key for our conversation around this aggregated data, is more about people who are living with disabilities and require supportive and other forms of subsidized housing. And so that is really all the three aspects of which we discussed at our meeting. We're going to have further conversation regarding Kim and David, who is in our space, as they will give their views on how we can continue to advocate and do this work together. But that's all the update I have for working group number 4, and I'll just hand it back over. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. There was a lot in there. So I will pause and open it to questions from the committee if anyone has questions for Anne-Marie on that update. Not seeing any questions. Are there any speakers to the item among the committee? And not seeing any speakers, so both of our working group chairs have done a great job in providing comprehensive and clear updates. So I will say thank you very much, and I would move to receive the item. Who's missing? We've got 2 missing. We have Chase. 1, 2, wait a second, we've got Nicole. 1, 2, 3. We have quorum, so please keep your cameras on. I can see quorum. It's approved. B, can you please weigh in and say that you are in favor or opposed? Saroja, I need to see your hand. Thank you. B, if you could please unmute and say approve. In favor. There we go.
Approved.
Opposed. Oh, approved. Sorry. I have to get my ears cleaned. Thank you. Okay, so carried. Thank you very much. And the next item is Anne-Marie again, based on some of the discussions. There's a letter from you, so over to you.
Are we going to be posting that letter, or did you just want?
It's already been posted. Is it going to go on the screen?
That's what I'm waiting on.
We're going to do that because it's good to have the visual. Thank you. It's coming. I appreciate everyone's patience with technology today. Maybe I can ask her to read the letter.
So I can read it from my computer.
If you could please read it, Anne-Marie, that would be great.
Yeah, for sure. So this letter is a result from a presentation to HRAC on choice-based housing access system for affordable housing. And the motion is that the Housing Rights Advisory Committee requests the Executive Director of the Housing Secretariat to continue to consult with the Housing Rights Advisory Committee as it works toward the integration of affordable rental housing into the choice-based housing access system and present at the November 19th, 2025 Housing Rights Advisory Committee meeting, and how the city will integrate human rights-based principles in the design, implementation, and continuous improvement process of the choice-based housing access system for affordable housing. That's it.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Are there questions to Anne-Marie regarding this? I think it was well explained in the summary from the working group meeting, and I think it's also very core to the work that we're doing as a Housing Rights Advisory Committee. But are there questions of clarification or questions of substance from anyone on the committee? And I'm just looking to the screen to see if anyone has a hand. Are there any speakers to the item? In which case, I move to adopt. Do I move, or is Anne-Marie moving? I will move to adopt the item, and can I please see a show of hands in favor? Looking for hands. Nicole, who else is missing? Thank you, Saroja. Got the screen on. Thank you. And B, can you please unmute and let us know if you're in favor or opposed?
Favor.
Thank you very much, B. Carried. I would like to thank Anne-Marie for the motion, for the work, and for the update from the working group. And I'd like to thank all three working group chairs for the work that they're doing in between meetings, diving into these issues, consulting with community members and experts on these issues so that we as a committee are better informed and able to bring forward these motions. So gratitude to the three working group chairs for that work. As Anne-Marie mentioned, we are delighted to include and invite a presentation today from the Centre for Independent Living in Toronto and the GTA Disability Coalition. However, before we start that, we are at 5 to 12. And what I would recommend to the committee is that we have a final item. I think this is going to take a little bit of time. There is a final item on our agenda, which is an update on the city's Housing as a Human Right training program. I would like to suggest at this time that we defer this item to our November meeting so that we can give our full attention and not feel rushed with the presentation from SILT and the GTA Disability Coalition. I hope that this does not disappoint our colleagues from the city who are going to present to us. I'm sure they'll be just as happy to do it in November. And so I think we need a motion to defer that item. Do we have a motion for that? There is the motion, and can I please see a show of hands for all in favor? Thank you, Anne-Marie. I saw your hand. Others? Thank you very much.
Favor.
Thank you very much, B. You're ahead of the game, and it carries. Wonderful. So we now move to the last item on our agenda. Members, this is a presentation from David Myers and Kim Adlard from the Centre for Independent Living in Toronto and the GTA Disability Coalition on emerging trends about access to housing for people with disabilities. I would like to turn it over to them. They are joining us online, and they have a presentation for us. So I'm happy to give the floor to Kim and David. It's all
Thanks,
yours.
Elizabeth. I'm just going to take a moment and get set up here and share my screen for our presentation. So just bear with me, please.
Good morning, everyone. A pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Good morning, David. Thanks.
Okay, we're up here. Does everyone see our
It's working.
slides?
Yes.
Good? Okay, great. Thank you. So thanks, everyone, for inviting us to your meeting today. We appreciate your commitment to equitable and just housing across our city. Especially to deeply affordable and accessible housing options for disabled residents. My name is Kim Adlard. I am the coordinator of the GTA Disability Coalition, and I am joined by my colleague David Myers, who will be introducing himself shortly. To share a bit about our 8-track interactions to date. We've been in discussions with Elizabeth as well as Marie, as she's mentioned, since the spring, and we gratefully presented at 8-track's improving access to housing working groups meeting in July. So we're grateful to have that opportunity, and we're very pleased to be at the full 8-track meeting today. So just a bit about us. The Center for Independent Living in Toronto is a community-based resource center run by people with disabilities for people with disabilities. SILT works from an independent living, otherwise known as IL, philosophy, which views people with disabilities as consumers with the right to examine choices, make decisions, and live independently with social and economic equity. The GTA Disability Coalition is a cross-disability network of organizations that advances the rights, priorities, and voices of people with disabilities and deaf folks in the GTA. Our key advocacy areas include disability poverty, housing, and transit. And we are administered by SILT, or the SILT Project, and funded by United Way, Greater Toronto. So just some key highlights. Disabled people experience twice as much core housing need as non-disabled people, particularly for unaffordable and inaccessible housing. Disabled people experience homelessness at 4 times the rate of non-disabled people. And at SILT, our attendant service application-centered waitlist for supportive housing and attending services is currently over 700.
Kim, it's getting a little difficult to hear you. Can you speak a little closer to the mic or speak up a little?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, well, now I'm going to pass it over to David to talk about some actions the city can take.
David, I believe you're muted.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Sorry about that. Yeah, my name is David Myers. I'm the Senior Manager of Independent Living Programs at SILT, and been there for about 7 years. And again, happy to be here. So Kim and I here, we fundamentally believe that the city must commit to realizing a right to accessible housing, reflecting its commitments under a housing charter, the National Housing Strategy, the Ontario Human Rights Code, the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, to name just a few. And despite being one of the city's populations with the most housing precarity, residents with disabilities remain deprioritized in the city's housing and shelter strategies, plans, policies, investments, and more. And while we recognize there are major and complex obstacles to progress on this issue, we see clear avenues for short and long-term action to stem the housing and shelter emergency experienced by precariously housed and unhoused disabled residents. So I've chosen to speak on 3 key areas where the city can make tangible progress on this issue. And the first has to do with a group called the Accessible Housing Working Group. Some of you may be aware of. So it's a housing group that reports to City Council, co-led by staff from the Housing Secretariat and representatives from about 6 disability and senior rights orgs, including SILT. We have on there the Accessible Housing Network, a very strong partner on this issue. We have Citizens with Disabilities Ontario. We have the Old Women's Network, and a number of others, but all with a rights-based vision around advancing accessible housing. Accessible and deeply affordable housing, I should say both. Our first meeting was in October 2021, and with council approval of a motion by then Mayor John Tory, the group was tasked with reviewing the city's accessible housing needs and producing a report for council with recommendations specifically for increasing the city's supply of accessible, affordable housing. Next slide, Kim. So between 2021 and August of 2024, the group met, I wouldn't say regularly, but sporadically, not as regularly as our community wanted to see happen. However, met over a 3-year period, almost, and reviewed existing data on universally assigned housing models and developments that might have been done, not just domestically, but in other countries as well, just to get some data and some research around both the viability of developing accessible or universally designed housing, because of course most of the developers made the case historically that building with accessibility in mind is not sustainable, not affordable at all, and so we wanted to challenge that narrative and that notion, and that was kind of one of our focuses. And actually, after having met with a number of accessibility experts and also builders like Daniel Spectrum that have built universally designed units, and also getting research from other jurisdictions, our group eventually reached a consensus last summer on recommending to City Council that 100% of units in its housing plan, future units, be built using universally designed principles as a human right. Our community was pretty clear that human rights had to be the framework for actually making this happen. And it took a while to bring the Housing Secretariat on board with new evidence that this was actually a viable plan as well, and cost-effective in the long term. As most of you know, our population is aging, and by the early 40s, the seniors population will skyrocket, and the need for accessible housing that allows people to age in place will be critical to our city. We have a lot of catching up to do between now and then. So in October of 2024, and this was a good news story really, the city approved all 7 recommendations in the Accessible Housing Working Group's report. One of them stated that 100%, as I said earlier, of future city-supported and led units be built with universally designed principles that optimize accessibility and the adaptability of units, and came up with about 43 accessibility features aligned with industry standards in an attached report. And it covers things like, entrances to washrooms, being able to do a turning radius with your wheelchair if you're a wheelchair user in a washroom, doorways, getting into your units, fixtures, etc. Quite an extensive array of accessibility features were covered there. And the report was accepted as part of an omnibus sort of a collection of motions, and but got approved, which was a surprise to many in our committee. We are concerned that for an entire year the group has not met, and so progress on the work to influence implementation of the report's recommendations has been considerably delayed. Committee members have asked Secretariat team to convene meetings and resume the work, because the big step next is to actually influence the implementation of the recommendations in that report. And we've been told that in September of this year, this month, those meetings will resume. And we would love if ATRAC would request the Secretariat resume the group's work now and provide even an update on the status of its next phases. Kim, I believe you're up next.
Kim, can you hear us?
Kim, are you there?
Sorry, yeah, I was on mute again. Sorry. Just reviewing some of the positive future impacts. Okay, well, they're in our slides in any case. So, and I have the. Can everyone still see the screen? Okay.
Yes, we can.
Our presentation.
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Thanks. So I'm going to now move on and speak to the shelters, the city shelter accessibility plan. So we commend. Sorry, folks. Commend City Council for approving the builds of 6 new city-owned and operated shelter sites. This is definitely a significant step towards realizing the shelter rights of unhoused residents. The city must make shelter accessibility one of the pillars of its capital plan, however, through all phases, starting with the design process. We recommend that universal design features provided in the Accessible Housing Working Group's report be applied to all new shelter sites. And we ask that TSSS are asked to report to ATRAC on their plans to ensure that the new shelters meet high accessibility standards. So just to touch on where we're at in terms of accessibility status of city shelters. In 2017, Toronto Shelter and Support Services conducted an accessibility audit of about a third of its shelters, which showed that no shelter met all of the 8 accessibility criteria, and there were no shelters that met most of the criteria. So some of the highlights of the audit report included a clear need for major improvements to meet accessibility needs of people experiencing homelessness. Many shelters required significant capital repairs to become accessible. Accessibility for many kinds of disabilities was lacking, and the city required additional funding to develop plans to make most of its sites fully accessible. I'm going to pass back to David for an accessibility audit update and to bring us to wrap up. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. Yeah, Toronto Shelter Support Services has planned to perform another round of accessibility audits of additional shelters. But to our knowledge, no report's been made public to this point. And we strongly recommend that TSSS prioritize completion of its shelter audit process in a timely manner and provide an update on its status. It's just an opportunity for existing shelters that have adaptability potential to actually be modified with accessibility in mind, so that at least while we're waiting for the onboarding of the 6 new shelters, that there's an opportunity for people who really are not being served well by the shelter system be provided with more access than is currently being provided now. And those shelters are going to take the new ones several years to come on board. And so we think that it's a crisis, an ongoing crisis for disabled unhoused or precariously housed folks were often turned away from shelters because accessibility is not there for them, particularly wheelchair users and folks who use other mobility devices are routinely turned away. End up being channeled to 211, and eventually they may be referred to orgs like us that have links to accessible housing and applications for supportive housing as well. So a lot of work to be done there. We think we need to really get as much support from the community on this file. And as we know, the housing and shelter emergency is getting worse by the day, and disabled people are being still deprioritized in ways that really violate their human rights. And just to circle back to what I was talking about earlier in terms of the accessible housing working group, if the city were to act on implementing the report's recommendations, we'll see, far fewer residents, far more residents will realize their right to adequate housing that fits their needs, and far fewer will lose their independence and well-being, as there'll be fewer admissions to supportive housing and long-term care institutions. As Kim said earlier, just on the supportive housing sector we hold a wait list for, there's over 700 people there on that wait list. Many wait 15, 20 years to get served. And a lot of those folks, they're only there because their units, the apartment units they're in, no longer serve their needs, so they can't live in those places anymore, and they need an accessible unit. And so that's just one example of just the potential of the rest of Toronto's housing plan having 100% utility.
I think you're muted, or David?
I think he froze, but Kim, is that the conclusion of the presentation?
Yes, pretty much. So we just had the one slide left, and just to thank everyone for inviting us to present today. And our slides have our contact information here. So I will stop sharing.
Thank you. That was a really helpful overview of some of the accessibility issues we have in the shelter system, and concerns also around universal design as we think forward on building the housing stock in the city. So that this will be an important lens for us to bring forward. Before we open it to questions, we do have a speaker to this item. It is Nicole Corrado, who I believe is online. Is Nicole available?
Hello. Yes.
Nicole, you have 5 minutes.
Okay. What I was going to say is that I live in Quebec, but I used to live in Toronto. And the reason I moved to Quebec, well, for many reasons, but the Montreal area, a suburb of Montreal, there was a place that I could find that was affordable and accessible. And the issue here with me being on the autism spectrum is that finding a landlord who understands autism and can accommodate. So if I get upset or something, the landlord will understand. And I was lucky enough to find a landlord who does understand in Beaconsfield, Quebec. But it's very, very tricky to find someone who can accommodate needs. So yeah, to find something that's sensory quiet, and even then it's not completely sensory accessible in the sense that the people from upstairs, they keep coming down into my bathroom in my basement apartment because they do their laundry. So that I don't have the same privacy as I would like. But it's just to find something that's both affordable and accessible. That's the tricky thing. Now, I don't have any companion animals. I wish I did. But that's another big problem that I've noticed, particularly in Quebec. It's less of a problem in Ontario, but huge problem in Quebec where we have no pet clauses. And that is a big problem, especially if a person has a companion animal or even a service animal who's not verified as a service animal, but the animal does provide them with support. So that's something that people really need to be thinking about, that these homes have to be pet friendly. And the same with the shelters. A lot of people, especially women fleeing abuse, will not go into a shelter or not even leave an abusive partner if they can't bring their animal. So that's one thing. I think that companion animals, and I'm not just talking about service animals, I'm talking about any animal, they should be allowed to bring them into shelters and into rental spaces. That is an accessibility thing for many people. The other thing people often don't think about, you mentioned shelters. A lot of the shelters are really crowded and don't provide really a sensory friendly environment. And I think it's intrusive, people from upstairs coming downstairs into my space. Imagine how intrusive it would be for housing, such as temporary housing like shelters, but also housing like if you have, say, group homes and that, those really are not suitable. And the Center for Independent Living is a wonderful organization. I have to say, they absolutely promote independent living regardless of disability. One thing that works for people with really high support needs would be to have live-in support person of the tenant's own choice. So that's something that I think that Toronto should start paying for. Well, it might be the province, but there really needs to be, options for people to choose their own caregiver. That way people don't end up in nursing homes or end up in group homes or somewhere where they don't want to be. People who are said to, for example, I can think of people who are non-speaking autistic and are called, quote, severe autistic. Well, a lot of those behaviors are just because the person has not found a communication method that works for them, and they're forced to live in an environment that they really don't want to be living in. So the behaviors are frustration, and it's their only way of expressing that. But if the person was given an opportunity to communicate, for example, using an iPad or something, then, and I know I'm going a little off topic here, but if they're allowed to use some way to communicate and have a personal support worker of their choosing, they would be able to live in housing of their choosing with that support, regardless of how disabled they are. You could have someone who's considered level 3, quote, severe autism, who absolutely could live semi-independently with a support worker in a sensory-friendly housing. And we need to be thinking of the entire autism spectrum and all disabilities, accommodating all disabilities, not just the ones that are easy.
Nicole, I'm going to ask you to wrap up, please.
Yeah, that's all I was going to say.
Okay. Thank you very much. Before you go, I just want to open it to the committee if any of the members have a question for you. Seeing none, I would like to thank you very much. That was, I think, helpful addition to our considerations around accessibility and inclusion. So thank you. Back to the presentation. I would ask members, do you have any questions on the item to our presenters? Yes, Anne-Marie.
Yes, David, I'm posing this question to you. I think in your report you had mentioned that the city approved 7 recommendations that around accessibility and affordability. Would you mind sharing what those 7 recommendations are?
I don't have them all handy in front of me, I must say. I apologize for that. Besides the one around, I mentioned earlier, around approving 100% of universal design in all the future units Another one was that the suite of features that were provided in the report be applied to other city guidelines around housing in general. So it goes beyond just the housing plan. I think for us, the critical one, the one we were fighting most for, was to ensure that 100% of units in Toronto's entire housing plan moving forward be built with the universal design features. I think that's the game changer we were looking for. And the others were helpful, but certainly not going to move the needle as much as this one will. And we also see it as an opportunity for the city to be a leader in this housing space, because let's face it, we have a huge nonprofit housing sector, and then we have the market housing sector, which is the biggest provider of housing. And right now, there's no law in Ontario that requires any building of housing to be accessible. 50% visible is what the code says, but accessible, no. So the other housing providers don't have any real incentive, and so the city can be a real leader, as Toronto being the largest municipality in Canada, to push this forward, not just here, but in other jurisdictions across the country, to actually advance the human right to accessible housing.
Thanks, David. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
I'd like to pick up on some of the questions or recommendations made by David and Kim in your presentation around the status of the audit process of shelters and the extent to which accessibility and universal design is being built into the program going forward. I believe there's someone from TSS. Joseph? Thank you. Or somebody, okay. If you want to introduce yourself, and we have an answer from TSSS to some of those questions.
Loretta Ramadan, through the chair from TSSS. So the city is currently working to improve accessibility in our system. We're doing this in conjunction with state of good repair work and in alignment with other larger city policies such as net zero. This is really to minimize site disruptions through doing ongoing construction. The accessibility audit of the shelter sites is intended to provide us with details of where there is compliance with modern day AODA and related standards such as the building code in order to better inform those future upgrades. Many of our sites are sort of complying with older standards that doesn't necessarily meet the needs of our clients today. And we are committed to maintaining and updating the infrastructure of our shelter system to ensure they're compliant and responsive to client needs. In addition, through our shelter design and technical guidelines, it outlines a mandate to ensure that 20% of our beds are accessible and barrier-free.
So the Accessible Housing Working Group, I think, I think part of what was being said is that they haven't heard back on that. So is there an opportunity for an update to them on the audit process, the timelines, and the sort of expected timelines for the amelioration of the current status?
Yeah, so we're just finalizing the results of the audit at this time and determining what a work plan and schedule would be. The focus is on more new built shelters. It's a lot easier to ensure they meet a higher accessibility standard as opposed to retrofitting an older facility.
Okay. And so can we have, when you have that timeline and report ready, I think it would be good for that to come back to ATRAC, just as part of the accountability, and obviously also the Accessibility Housing Working Group. Are there other questions of the committee to the presenters, to David or Kim? I'm looking around on the screen for hands. Yes, Annie. No? Okay. All right. Then is there another part I missed? No? Then with that, I would like to say thank you very much to David and Kim. I would move, and nobody wants to speak to that on the committee? Looking for hands. Seeing none, I would move to receive the item. All in favor? If I could see a show of hands from committee members. Thank you. Chase coming on, Saroja, Nicole. Thank you. B, are you in favor or opposed? B? We will check that. In favor. Thank you so much, B. I always jump the gun on that. Thank you very much. Thank you to David and Kim. It's not one, but two presentations now that you've made to HRAC and to a working group. So I appreciate the time that you have taken to inform us and to help us think more broadly around the right to housing and ensuring that we bring an accessibility lens to everything that we're doing, and that cuts across our work in a broad way. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and everyone.
Thank you. Now we have deferred item 10, and so I would move to the final motion to excuse absentees. Look at us at 12:28. Could I have someone please move the motion to excuse the absence of members not in attendance today? Thank you, Anne Marie. All in favor? Seeing a show of hands. Thank you very much. I'll ask the clerk. Well, we didn't display the motion, but we're okay. And that concludes our business for today. Thank you, everyone, for participating. Our next meeting for your calendars is Wednesday, November the 19th, 2025. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much for your work and commitment to this committee and bringing forward the right to housing. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone.